Welcome to my podcast. This is the podcast Senior to Seniors, where I dive into the stories of seniors, explore their unique experiences, discuss the real issues facing seniors today, and introduce you to those assisting seniors in their senior journey. I have the privilege to talk with some of the most interesting people in the world impacting the senior community today. So, welcome to Senior to Seniors. And today I am joined by Mark Stephen Porro. He's joining me, I think it's like 8 o'clock at night, but he's joining me from southern France, where he lives. So, welcome, Mark. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for being
Yeah,
here.
it's nice to be here. Yeah. Poor, pitiful Mark
Yeah,
living in the south of France. Oh, it's terrible.
you'll get used to it. I got a feeling you get used to it.
Yeah. What's nice here, unless you're not into wine, it's the largest wine growing region in the world,
Wow,
in this area. So I make a joke. I say, if you throw a grape, you'll hit a wine domain,
I bet.
and then you go visit, and it's lovely. It's a lovely way of life here.
Yeah, my family, the Mazziotti family, actually has a vineyard and has a wine called Est, Est in Italy, which we can't even get here. But when family goes over there, we bring some back. So they're in that area of Italy that we'll talk about just a little bit. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're with me. I just want to say it from the beginning. I read your book. Your book, by the way, for those listening, is called A Cup of Tea on a Commode. And I read your book on Kindle on my phone. So I have a Kindle app to my phone. And I have to tell you, reading a book using Kindle um, doesn't do it for me. I wish I had your book in my hands. I wish I had your
Well, go buy one for God's
well,
sakes.
I'm going to have to. I bought the Kindle to help you out just a little bit, and so I'm going to need to because it was a perfectly wonderful book, and there's places that I wanted to highlight and be able to keep. But I think I have enough here to carry on a conversation with you. So, first of all, your grandfather is from Bari in Italy.
Well,
My
a little north of Bari.
little north of Bari, still
Yep.
southern Italy, but
Yep.
yeah, a little north of Bari. My family is from Longabuco, which is about 240 kilometers from Bari. And so I kind of just looked, and in 1900, when your grandfather was like, is that when he made the journey to America?
Well, my great grandfather came first. So he came with his eldest son in 1891. We found out once I visited that village. I
Yeah.
knew my grandfather came when he was 10 years old in 1895 with his mom and his older sister.
Well, so around 1900, my research showed me that there were about 33 million people in Italy. So I figure, Mark, we got to be related. There were only 33 million people in Italy, and we were only 240 kilometers, or our family. So, heck, you're probably my cousin.
We're cousins. Yeah, that would be very cool. When so I went to the village. I'm not sure if we're talking about this, but I went to that village. I took my dad for kind of for his 80th birthday in 1995. Nobody had been there from our family in 100 years.
Hmm.
And there was a rumor about why my great grandfather left because he was the mayor of this village, and I don't know how that rumor crossed the Atlantic, but it was not a great story that we wanted to tell. But I wanted to find out, the family history. And we found out that he was not the bad guy in this story; he was actually the hero. And then the gentleman who was the entire police force, this little guy, probably 5'2",
Yeah.
Vito Cupola, was also the town historian, and he just had facts on the tip of his tongue about my great grandfather and the story that he told. And he showed us the house that my grandfather and great grandfather lived in, and it was very cool. But we didn't meet any relatives, any direct relatives. We did meet one gentleman that knew my great grandfather's younger brother who stayed in the village.
Hmm.
And that was the closest we got to family. But it was still a really fun trip, and my dad was not well at the time, and he did great, and I shot a documentary of it. And I'm so glad that I did because it's just it was a very cool story. And he said one of the highlights of his life, when you have your dad knocking on the door of his father's place that he
Yeah.
left, 100 years earlier, it is very cool. So.
That was a great story in your book that I really enjoyed. And so let me just for those that are listening and are watching on YouTube, just a little bit about you, Mark. I apologize. I just jumped into us being cousins. I didn't even think about introducing you properly. But let me just read just a little bit of what I have about you. That Mark Stephen Porro is a New Jersey native, exit 163, which is kind of an interesting thing, who earned an industrial design degree from The Ohio State University. After years of agency work, his love of acting led him to Hollywood, where he appeared in dozens of television, film, and stage productions. Mark also spent his 28 years in Tinseltown entrepreneuring, and he started 5 nonprofit companies. But hold the applause, none were intended to be nonprofit companies. He now lives in the south of France, but hold your pity. The sound he's there, loves it there in wine country. He's an award-winning designer, writer, director, and now, congratulations, Mark, a best-selling, award-winning author. He has written lots of jokes, several screenplays, and one award-winning short film. A Cup of Tea on the Commode, a sad, sweet, and funny debut memoir, chronicles his multitasking adventures of filling his mother's last years with love, laughter, and joy. And I've got to tell you, I loved reading the book. I am not a memoir reading guy. I have read a lot of business books and books on self-development and all that kind of stuff. But you gave me a new love for reading memoirs with your book, Mark. It
Oh,
was
cool. Thank you. Yeah.
beautifully done. So tell me why you needed to write this book. Why was that important to you?
Well, I have a knack for recording family history. I'm not sure where that comes from. Part of it is curiosity. But when we would go on family vacations, I would usually write a poem to kind of sum up what happened during that week.
Mhm.
My brother and dad started this tradition. Once, we all grew up and left home, it was tough to get us all together. But my dad would pay for a week in a house or a couple of cabins or so back east. Most of them were back east. Um, where the entire family would come for a week. And at that point, we were 20 or more people with all the nieces and nephews. I had no kids, but it was very cool for us to all spend all that time and catch up. And so when we finished those things, again, I would write a poem to kind of sum up the week with the highlights. And then I started this other tradition I call memory books, where um, at first, I did it for my dad. My dad was a very tough guy to buy a gift for. I,
Mhm.
I mean, he had pants and shoes older than me, and he was one of the original recyclers. So he was really tough. So when he turned 75, I was living in LA at the time, and I said, "What can I do that's going to be a little different?" And so I decided I'm going to send him 75 memories, and um, and then I thought, wow, how am I going to come up with this stuff?
Sure.
Once I opened that door, I had to edit down to 75. They just flooded out of me. I started with my earliest memory and kind of kept it in chronological order. And a lot of them, most of them were really good. There were a couple, as my dad called, pithy, which were, we had some struggles
Sure.
during my upbringing and stuff like that. But I included them all in there. I said they're all important for us, our relationship, and our relationship at that point was really good. And the response from him was amazing. And he he didn't tell me directly. He was a letter writer, so I didn't hear from him first. I heard from my siblings who said, what is this thing you sent Dad? He's going crazy over this thing. And it was so cool that then I started doing them for everybody. And they evolved into a really elaborate design projects. You know, I had a design background, so
Sure.
it was very cool. And the presentation to the recipient was amazing. And I started inviting other people to share their memories and photographs. So it got to a point where people were sending me hundreds of photographs and memories. And I remember when I did my aunts, when they turned 80, we got distant cousins who I didn't even know. I had, like, you know, her sister track down people. So she got memories from people I had no idea. I know my uncle, and he had, you know, another family and stuff like that. So it was very, very cool. And then the Italy trip, you know, I made a documentary of that and spent a good time editing and a fortune.
Hmm.
And some people are saying, why are you doing this? I said, well, if you don't appreciate it now, one day you will.
Yeah.
And some people who have seen this thing recently, you know, siblings said, oh, you know, I really love this thing now because we're seeing our dad who's been gone for over 25 years.
Sure.
And yeah, so um, what, when my dad passed, he passed 14 years before this incident with my mom happened. And I only had 8 days with him. And we were very close at this point. So I spent those 8 days and I took extensive notes, and that's just from my writing background. So I kept notes, and we shared some really cool things. And I didn't want family members to miss out on some of these intimate moments because I was with them sometimes throughout the night, and some really neat things were revealed and stuff like that.
Sure.
And then, so when my mom was kind of on her deathbed, when this thing started in 2011, I took extensive notes and photographs and videos and stuff like that. And then when I became her full-time caregiver, again, I was privy to a lot of little conversations and moments that I didn't want the others to miss out on. So I wanted to record them for us. And then while I was going through that, I learned a lot from hospice. My mom was on hospice care for
Right.
about 6 months. And so I studied, and my younger sister and I, we hung out with hospice because we didn't know at that point how long mom was going to be with us. So
Right.
we wanted to learn as much as we could to take care of her as much as we could for however long she was going to be here. So we got pretty good at this thing. And then I think my approach to caregiving was a little different coming from the son's perspective, and maybe a little bit of the romantic, I guess, view of it. Uh, but I had some friends being baby boomers, so, you know, we're all going through this or went through it or going to go through this. And I had some friends who were going through it, and I gave them some advice and some tips of what I was doing, and they seemed to get some benefit out of it.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, you know what? I think a book is going to be a better way of getting this out there. You know, people talked about making it a movie and all that kind of stuff, which may happen in the future.
Yeah.
But the book was something I had, I guess, almost full control over.
Sure.
And then when I found a publisher, they were great. I still had the final word, but I worked with two editors, and they were great. And they made the book better than it was. I thought pretty good, but it was my first book, and memoir is a very different genre, so I had to study that genre. But something resonated with this publisher, and my goal was to get it published. I wanted to be a published author as opposed to self-publishing, and so that worked out well. And we spent about a year and a half refining it, and the results have been great. You know, it's won a bunch of literary awards so far, and the critics and readers have sent me lovely notes and had lovely responses like yours to it. And both of my parents were very funny, so sense of humor was a big deal for us. And luckily, they passed some of that on to us. And so there's a lot of humor in the book. I said, if people don't really care about the caregiving, at least they'll be entertained because they were some characters.
Sure. And, you know, in your writings, you know, some might look at it as some things you talk about as kind of irreverent, if you will, but they're all in love. I mean, what you talked about, you opened the book. I mean, you told everything. It doesn't appear that much was not talked about and or that you held anything back. So it's such a beautiful story. And I agree with you. The more people that could read your book would be, I think, so much better off for knowing the trials and tribulations of caring for a parent. Because if you have parents, uh, you're likely to go through something like this. Not exactly yours,
Right.
but with aging and caregiving and with dementia and with all kinds of the care decisions that we're going to have to go through, we put it off, right? We don't deal with it
Yeah,
until
it's
that moment. And I think, you talked about that when you got the call. You were, in Los Angeles and you were told you need to come home, right? Mom
yeah,
just got the last rites or whatever. And,
yeah,
how do you prepare for that?
right.
And I think this book allows people to prepare for that. And it is funny. And it's also sad. When I put it down at the very end, or I used to put it down Kindle wise, but when I was done with the book, I just felt a sense of that I know you and I know the people in your family and the characters in the story. For your first book, and with the editor's help, I'm sure it was beautifully written. And so everybody should buy the book and everybody should read it. It's for everyone. Um, so could I just read something from your book? I know watched a couple podcasts you've done, and you've done and been very giving of your time to others to do the podcast. But here's the description that you wrote, that I think people, if they don't get your book, I think that's a mistake, but if they choose not to get the book, they'll know who I'm talking to today. So here's how you described yourself in the book. You said, I was the one who cooked, fed, and dressed her. I changed diapers, bathed, and baby powdered her. I combed her hair, trimmed her fingernails, brushed her teeth. In mom's case, dentures. I carried, chauffeured, and shopped. I cleaned, washed, and folded laundry. I ordered and administered vitamins and medications. I comforted and cajoled and hugged and kissed. I cheered her up doing the river dance Irish jig, which made her laugh, but my shins cry. I got her out of bed and walking again. I navigated road trips and invented Day of Beauty. I celebrated her every success on the Commode, and I was the one who performed with tender loving care my least favorite task, and perhaps mom's as well, wiping her butt. A little bit of irreverence, but it's the truth and beautifully written. Talk to us about the title of the book. Mark, how did you get to the title in itself, which of course, and I'm sure was meant to be, gets people's attention with the commode, a cup of tea on a commode. So could you talk about how you get to that title?
Well, it's funny, when I took on this, I guess I would say this adventure with mom, it's interesting how the universe supports that decision, because a lot of things fell in place that maybe wouldn't have. But I was committed, and so the whole process was very easy. The writing was not so easy, but in the writing, and I didn't write until I moved to France, because I get too emotional. I got emotional when you were reading that stuff in the
Sure.
book. That is good. I forget some of these things. But so when I was in France, I had enough distance, and I wrote, and this is the room I actually wrote in. And as I'm writing, I had ideas for, I had another title in mind, which when it goes to, I think, foreign languages, it may have to be changed, because commode is a chest of drawers here in France.
Okay. Mhm.
So they don't get it. When I mentioned to a French friend the title of the book, he says, why not? Like there was nothing interesting about it. Um, when this incident happened, my mom could no longer walk, at least couldn't walk until we got her up about a year later. Um, and so we had to put a commode bedside. And so sometimes Mother Nature took it a little longer than was comfortable for either one of us. And kind of as a joke, this one morning I said, hey, her favorite beverage was a cup of hot tea with skim milk, no sugar. And I said, would you like a cup of tea while we wait? And she said, sure. And so I made her a cup of tea and it became a hit. So, I called these adventures my multitasking adventures, but mom was also a multitasker. So, a cup of tea in the commode. I thought it was just, and again, it just kind of came because of this whole adventure. It came to me, and I said, that's a better title. The other title, it'll happen probably in some of these other foreign territories, which I'm now talking to publishers around the world and stuff, which is kind of cool. So
Yeah.
some things will change. Sometimes I may have a say in that, how they translate the book. But a cup of tea in the commode is very, I think, catchy, kind of funny, but also catchy, but also very practical. And it just came out of once I made that decision, that was a practical thing that was part of it.
And I love your description that she loved hot tea, what, no sugar, how did you,
Skim milk, it was
no
skim
milk?
milk, probably 2%, whatever. Anyway, we grew up with all the, and it was funny because she was a coffee drinker before she was pregnant with me. I'm the fifth out of her six kids,
Yeah,
and she was a coffee drinker. And so she said she just could not stand the taste of coffee when she had me inside her, and then she never went back to coffee.
it changed. Yeah, that happens sometimes. When women carry a baby, things will change. Tell me how important was humor in the overall caregiving and life that you shared with your mom in the final years. How important was that?
Well, it's very important. My goal, when I asked my mom if she wanted me to do this. I was there for a long time with hospice. Once mom was back on the mend, I went back to LA, and then I came back in September. So this was like 7 months after this incident. I took her down to the Jersey Shore for her grandson's wedding, and that was the first time she was out of the house and got her all dolled up and did the makeup, and the day of beauty thing didn't happen yet, but it was the beginning of it because I grew up with three sisters and I learned how to do more than just put the toilet seat down. And so I knew how to get my mom, as we call, all dolled up. And she was so happy.
Yeah.
And everybody was so happy to see her because some of these people hadn't seen her since she was on her deathbed. And so I knew at that point that I had to take a bigger role in this thing. And so I asked her, I said, you want me to come back and make sure you're healthy and happy for the rest of your life? And she said, yes. And I said, all right, if I do this, uh, I will now be in charge. So
Mhm.
you need to obey me.
Uh-huh.
And and her mood completely changed. And
Yeah.
then she puckered up for a kiss because she loved kisses. And I wasn't sure if that was a sign of surrender or one wishing me luck because she was a tough cookie. She could be a real pain in the neck. And but once I got her permission, I said, just so you know, we're going to have fun.
Yeah.
And my goal, I didn't tell her this, but I said my goal was to make her laugh at least once a day. So that's what, like the river dance and all that kind of, because she had some bouts of depression. This incident this was now in February, she kind of willed herself to die because she was not happy.
Hmm.
Uh, so I was concerned about that. So I had to lift her out of these dark spaces every once in a while. So if I had to do a river dance, I did a river dance.
Yeah. How did your siblings take all this? Because I mean, you were the kid. You were the son that stepped up um, because you could. You were in a position where you could. Thankfully, uh,
Yeah.
gosh, just imagine, Mark, if you wouldn't have been able to come back and do what you did. But how did your siblings take all this? Because I know there can be, this can be division when you're going through all
Yeah.
the decisions that had to be made. tell me about working
The
with your.
stories I've been hearing is I was very lucky. You know, we
Yeah.
grew up in a really uh, uh, loving, nurturing family. Both of my parents were very caring about other people. My dad's favorite prayer was others. You know, put others before yourself. And my mother was kind of the same way, especially with animals. She was amazing with animals. And so these guys, one brother lived close by,
Mhm.
another one lived in the same town, and he would come visit mom. But Michael, my oldest brother, was the one who stopped in every morning and evening and took care of her medications and stuff like that, and took care of all the family finances, which were another big deal
Big thing.
in these whole things. But I had a really good relationship with both of my folks because of, I think, my curiosity and family history and things. I got them both to really open up to me about things and reveal things to me I don't think the other kids knew. And then they may have been surprised with some of the revelations in the book. But I got these guys to open up, and there were times where there was a lot of stress in my parents' marriage, and I was overprotective, I guess, of mom, so I would step in. And there were other times where mom just kind of shut down, and I got her to open up about stuff. And as she read in the book, one of, was a very cold one, but I said, we're not getting back in the car. And this was a very cold, wintry, snowy day. I said, we're not getting back in the car until you talk to me. And it was great because she talked to me. And then I think at that point they felt maybe more comfortable opening up and sharing. I guess opening up their heart and sharing things because that generation, this was like the Depression generation and stuff. They didn't talk about feelings
Mhm.
and pain. I don't think either one of my parents, rarely did they ever talk about pain. And they had pain, they had physical pain, I'm sure emotional pain and stuff like that, but they kept that all, to themselves. And so when I did this, I knew the siblings trusted me. I think we all trusted each other. Whoever was going to take this on, if they
And
did, we
that
said,
doesn't always happen. I mean,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I think because of our upbringing, we all, we all were very independent. All of us at one point, the six of us, I think because both of my parents were independent, we all had our own businesses. And I
mhm.
wasn't sure if people were afraid to hire us or that was our choice. I don't know. But we're all very, from Jersey, everybody has an opinion and everybody thinks they're more correct than the others. And that's what we grew up in.
Yeah.
But they all, again, I was very fortunate. They yielded once I said I'm doing this and I got mom's permission, and then they started seeing how well mom was responding to it. I
Right.
think that helped, and they made and they knew I was a very responsible guy, and if anything happened, I would make sure the thing was done correctly or I did the right thing and stuff like that. So. Yeah, from other stories that I've heard about, especially with people responding and stuff like that, I was very fortunate, and everybody pitched in. Not everybody's comfortable doing this stuff, like the stuff that you read. There was no lines that I didn't cross because, and part of that was my acting. I said that I'm taking this role on as caregiver. It's going to be a little awkward for a son doing this with his 90-year-old mom, but as a caregiver, this is what you got to do. So you got to get over it and get on with it because there was work to do.
Well,
Uh,
and there couldn't have been a better caregiver than you, Mark, in the way that you took care of your mom. So let's talk about caregivers because there were issues with the caregivers that would come in and help you with even with hospice and so forth. So, part of this podcast is to help seniors be aware of things they should know, maybe well, about this journey that you went on, but the caregivers that you had, the Tweedles, I think is how you referred to them, right? That's could you?
yes, for legal reasons.
Yes, I
Tweedledee and Tweedledum, yeah.
yeah,
I still may hear from them at some point, but I don't think so
yeah, yeah.
because there's everything in there is true, and I actually went very easy on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
So they were chosen to come live in the house with your mom. This is pre your
Yeah.
come, right? And they stayed. Um, tell us about living in the house with those people that didn't do what they were supposed to do, or the agreement of why they came and so forth.
Right. Well, in their minds, they think they did, I guess. That was one of the problems. So
Yeah.
they were the third family we had in. My mother was in assisted living for a few years,
Okay.
and had her own apartment with her little dog, Zuri,
Mhm.
and the dog bit somebody. And they had I guess, a one-time policy,
Yeah.
and that was it. So mom says, if the dog goes, I go. And so she came back, and we still had the family house. I think it was about a 4 year time in assisted living, and she liked it because she was like a social butterfly. So being
Sure.
around people and all that stuff was very nice for her.
Yeah.
But that dog was her kid, maybe her favorite kid out of the six of us, and now the seventh. And so
Yeah.
she came back to the house, but the house wasn't in great condition. So I went upstairs. I'm pretty good with building and all that kind of stuff and design. So I made upstairs a little more presentable, kind of like a live-in apartment. And we had, at this point, so we hired a family. At first, it was a mother and her daughter who came in, and she was a nurse at the hospital, which was only about 4 blocks away. So we thought, oh, this is great. Well, she ended up being kind of a wacky girl. So
Hmm.
that lasted maybe about a year. And then we had another couple. The wife was a nurse. The husband was a handyman and like a driver for a very wealthy man at one point. And they had their little girl, and they were great. They loved my mom, and my mom loved them, and it was lovely. But after about a year, they saved enough to buy their own house, and so they bought their house.
Yeah.
And they were nice. They would come back and visit, and we would go visit them and stuff like that. So that was a real friendship.
Good.
The first person we never heard from again. And so the next family that came in were the I call the Tweedles, and they had their little kid who was like the grandchild of Tweedledum. And he was not I called him evil. I wouldn't say his first name, but he was evil for a little kid. And I think part of it was the upbringing of the mother and the grandmother. And he didn't like my mother, and my mother didn't like him because he was a rude little kid. And but they hid. There was a lot of tension, and they had free rent. The town that I grew up in was Ridgewood, New Jersey. It had a great educational system, so the kid had great schools they could go to. Um, and the deal was, you keep mom company, you do the cooking, you do the laundry, and manage household duties. At that point, a mom could still pretty much function. And she went to a senior center for activities several times during the day. And but these people took advantage of the situation. And they didn't like mom, but whether it was the free rent or whatever, they stuck it out. And my brother, unfortunately, the one who hired all these people, it was a lot on his shoulders. And to onboard another group was something he wasn't looking forward to, because the interview process, which I went through later on, looking for a caregiver, is not easy. And then you leave them in your house
Yes.
with your mother,
You trust
and
them.
that's a big trust issue. So that is, boy, I don't know. I mean, again, we were very fortunate that I did this, because hiring somebody later on, we had to hire somebody after I had some medical incident. We found somebody who was rare, and Marina was just great, and we trusted her, and she was a strong woman too, but she was great with my mom. They really loved each other. But it's rare to find that, and very difficult. So I don't envy anybody in that search, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
And if it is a family member, what I wanted to say about the siblings, if you're not comfortable doing this stuff, don't do it.
Hmm.
Don't force it, because if you're tense and stressed out by doing this, your loved one, patient, whoever is going to feel that too. And whether you make them feel guilty or uncomfortable, it's not good for either one.
Yeah.
So with our siblings, a couple of them were not comfortable with the hands-on stuff, so they didn't do it.
Hmm.
But they did other things. They cooked, or they took care of the outdoor, the lawn, the garden, and the snow shoveling and all that kind of stuff. So everybody, all my brothers and sisters pitched in and did what they were comfortable doing. And it worked out. We were, again, very fortunate. It worked out good for us.
So fortunate for you and your mom, and for her, the end of life things, and very fortunate. One thing I want to talk about, and this isn't a book review, but it's hard not to want to talk about things in the book that aren't necessarily um, health related and so forth. One of them, if we could just talk about it for a second, Mark, is your experience with your father and the story. I'm not sure how we can help this audience understand this story. It really needs to be read, but your story, baseball story, and how
I
things.
still have pains. I still have.
Well, yeah, I had a similar thing with my son where I went to one of his football games. He was sitting on the bench, and the reason he was sitting on the bench is because he was being a jerk, and they sat him down on the bench. And so I sat through the game. Uh, he came out, or the team came out for second half, and he wasn't with the team. He instead joined a bunch of his friends that were in the bleachers and so forth, which just infuriated me. And so I promised him that I would never come to another game because I was so angry. And I didn't ever go to one of his football games. Later, at the end of that season, when they had their awards banquet, um, I didn't go because I didn't go to his games, and I promised him I wouldn't. He received an award for the most inspiring player on the team, and it still eats at me. We talked about it. It's in my book as well. Yours is kind of a similar story, a little bit, where your father held it in for 23 years. The base. Could you talk a little bit about that? Do you think we can get that
Yeah,
understood?
well, what's interesting, so that came out of actually the 75 memories. So this incident happened. Okay, so I'm playing baseball. My dad was a baseball coach, and he took a lot of time um, uh, teaching us the fundamentals, me and my two older brothers. And I was not interested in the fundamentals. I just wanted to like get up and hit home runs and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and uh, and he didn't like that, so we had an issue with baseball. So he rarely came to my games, and I was okay. I wasn't totally interested in baseball, but it was the thing to do. So every spring you went out and you played Tiny Tim and stuff like that. So this one game, nobody knew he was my dad because every once in a while he came to a game. He would always stand aside out of embarrassment or so he could leave early or what. I wasn't sure. Um, so the umpire never showed up for this little league game. And so he volunteered to be the umpire. And I'm like, what are you doing? But nobody complained because nobody knew he was my dad. But I certainly did,
It did,
you
yeah.
know? And so this one incident, so I didn't have a very eventful game. And the last inning, I had the opportunity to win the game. And so the count, we worked out the count to be a full count. So it was 3 balls, 2 strikes.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for the payoff pitch. And my focus was going back and forth between the guy behind me, my dad, who's going to decide what
Yeah.
happens with this ball,
Yeah.
and the pitcher that's delivering it.
Sure.
And so this ball comes at me, and it's not a strike, so I don't swing at it. And I hear behind me, strike three, you're out, game's over. And I was about maybe 10 years old,
Uh-huh.
and I'm just infuriated. And we drove home together and never said a word.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I did these 75 memories, I always, that thing was one of the pithy memories. And so I included that in the 75 memories. And when I got my dad's letter, he said he was really moved by all of it. He says, even though some were pithy, and I'm probably going to get emotional. So he says, I remember the baseball incident very clearly. The ball was high and outside and not a strike.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I've regretted that call for 23 years.
And did he make that call, Mark, because he believed that you need to attack things, you should swing, you go for
Yeah, that
that?
was his fundamental. Never go down without swinging,
Uh,
even if it's a chance that it's not a strike. And this was clearly not a strike, and he had finally admitted it. But he wanted to teach me a lesson.
oh,
Now, if he talked about that on that drive home, we would have been fine.
sure.
But he didn't.
That would have been the lesson.
Yeah.
But
And he held on to it. So I felt worse for him for you and your son, you're holding on to that for 23 years. And it wasn't like, oh, maybe it wasn't. He said, no, clearly it was high and outside, which is what I remember, high and outside.
mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of defined us for a number of years.
Yeah,
And then the other one was, that game of all games. Not one witness said anything to my dad. I wish my dad called the coach. I drove in that one game, 13 runs, which has never been done, professional or amateur.
uh-huh.
And my father didn't believe me. I got the biggest ice cream sundae you could get because you got one for a home run, but I hit 3 home runs but drove in those 13 runs as well. And so I got this enormous ice cream sundae, which was great, and it was the home run, I guess, the leader that season. And my dad never believed me.
Yeah,
So it was a shame. I don't know if I talked to him during our last 8 days if I brought that up, but
yeah,
he could have just called the coach and said, "Did this happen?" And he was, "Oh my God, it was amazing." But yeah, nobody was there, and it was like 5 minutes from my house.
yeah. Well, that story really hit home for me. What a beautiful story. Maybe not so beautiful, but impactful story. And I want to read just one of the things from your book. We've got just a few more minutes to talk. This is one of the things that you said in the book. You said, "I love my mom. I do. But forgive me for saying this. Forgive me for this even entering my mind. But there is a limit." And when I read that, my mom went through not as long of a period of time as your mom. I didn't have to care for her. She went very quickly, but there is a limit, isn't there? Um,
Well, there shouldn't be, but
no, but there is. I mean, we're
yeah,
humans, right?
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and that was again. I'm coming from being a carefree bachelor and no wife and no kids, so dealing with unconditional love was a new concept for me.
yeah,
My MO before that was once I got, especially with dating and so, once I got bored, I moved on. And with work also, and that's why I started all these nonprofit companies. I like the adventure. I like starting and giving it your all, but then you say, okay, this is about as far as we're going to go. So let's move on to the next thing.
yeah,
But with my mom, there was no moving on.
yeah, yeah,
And but yeah, that was I guess a stream of consciousness and that came out of, well, that was a separate chapter, I think, but that also came out of, I think, when my mom, she asked me, why am I doing this? Which was interesting because we had a very stressful day. And she said, why are you doing this? I said, because you're my mom and I love you.
yes,
And she's like, and I said, it's an honor for a son to take care of his mother. And she was like, really? And that hurt me because, at that point, we were probably a year and a half, maybe even 2 years into this. And yeah, so that was some soul searching. in that. And so I, and so that's, I talk about that in the chapter. So why did I do this? And so it's interesting. So I did the book, right? And it was released on Mother's Day last year. And I couldn't do the audiobook for a while because there's no way I was going to be able to get through it. And so I had to use all my acting training. And so like about 6 months later, I set up a studio here and recorded the audiobook. But during that period, I did some rewriting. Also, I heard from my siblings. I got a couple things wrong, like my sister's university major and things like that.
Yeah.
So I did some rewriting because also, when you write, it's important to read your work out loud to
Mhm.
see if people talk like that. My writing is kind of very conversational. It's not this super,
It
you
is
know,
very
ridiculous stuff.
easy to read.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some of it's not so easy to read for the audiobook. I'm sitting there going, who wrote this sentence? These words are impossible to put together. So there was a few moments like that. But upon reflection, so it seems like, you read the story. It seems like I went back to rescue my mom.
Hmm.
And in a sense, I did.
Yes.
Upon the reflection, though, I think maybe my mom rescued me.
Oh God. Yeah.
Because at that point I had nothing. I had a really, I guess, adventurous life. I did a lot of good things, maybe did some bad things, but I had no real purpose. And mom gave me a purpose or an opportunity to take this on, and luckily I did, and it was the most important thing I've done in my life.
Most important, and from the perspective of reader, most people, maybe the most difficult thing that you could have ever done in your life.
But
Um,
I didn't see it. I didn't see it as that way
yeah.
because the goal was mom.
Yeah.
Mom deserved better. The focus was on taking care of her,
Making her happy.
and the difficulty and stuff I knew I would deal with later, or
Mm.
tried. I certainly tried to keep that out of the, let's say, the room. There were moments when certainly didn't happen,
Yeah.
and I'm not proud of those moments. But again, you're human. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
but yeah, so.
Well, another interesting thing that you said, you kind of just touched on it a little bit, that you said, I never believed in angels, but for some reason they believed in me, and I'm truly thankful for that. And so I think that kind of sums up the story, is that, you never believed in angels, uh, but for some reason they believed in you. And that's very touching. It's a beautiful quote from your book for me. Um, and so I thank you for the book.
Well,
It's such a good,
my pleasure and pain.
of course.
No, it's lovely because what's been a lovely gift to me is you put your heart and soul into something you don't know. Originally it was intended just to record, moments for my family.
Mhm.
But you hope it's going to resonate with others. And then when it does, and I mean, some of the notes and letters and comments, let's say on Facebook, the reviews have been lovely.
Mhm.
But people, especially from my hometown, boy, those guys are great. Um, I think everybody in Ridgewood, New Jersey is on Facebook because it just keeps expanding and it's lovely. But, people have really intimate things. There was one, I won't mention name, and I don't know this person. I think she went to my high school, but she definitely lived in my hometown for a while. And that's been a lovely, I guess, side story to this is it's brought a lot of people I haven't been in touch with for 50 years
Yeah.
back in touch. And they're saying, oh, well, tell David I said hello, and tell DC I said hello, which is really nice. So I'm now the conduit to Ridgewood and my siblings. But this one girl said, oh, I'm reading your book to my mom, who's 95, and we're really enjoying it. And then the next year she writes, um, I have to read your book again because I'm going through some stressful times. So she says, the humor is really helpful.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear from her in a while. And then she writes me and she said, I just wanted you to know that my mom died 2 weeks ago. 2 days would have been amazing.
Yeah.
And your book helped me so much
Mhm.
because of not only what you did, but the humor that you put in it really helped me get through this. And I just wanted to thank you for that. And I'm like,
Well,
oh my gosh. I mean, that was just,
yeah.
there's been
And
a few like that, but that was very raw, a moment for her
sure.
and kind of her and generous to share that.
No, and
But
I think
boy,
you
that
can do that for so many people that are listening to this and who do get your book. And so tell me, kind of end on this, what's next for you? You mentioned there could be perhaps a screenplay or something, or that can come just depending on what happens. But what's next for you, Mark?
well, I'm still marketing a cup of tea and a Commode like crazy. We're building the brand, and now we're going after worldwide rights and stuff like that, which will be interesting. But the last draft I did before turning it over to the publisher, I cut about 4,000 words out because I said these are probably more appropriate for my dad's book. And so my dad's book, that was intended to be a book a long time ago before this thing with mom, because I only had those 8 days with him. So and I had a number of books that I wanted to write now that I'm writing books. Um, but I thought I could combine three of these stories into one book. And this is all focused on my dad because I had those 8 days with dad. This trip to Italy, which I go into more depth in my dad's book. And he invented this snack food that you read about.
Sure.
He called them Nutrinuts, and we eventually renamed it to Grandpa Poe's Originals. Was this popcorn snack, and we built that into a national brand for a while, and it was lovely. But my brother and I started that company to honor my dad and
Yes.
his invention because it was a great product and there was nothing like it on the market still after 40 years. So I took that on as another, I guess, family legacy to make a reality because it never happened with my dad. Um, but during this trip in Italy, I have the ending for the book, and I don't want to totally ruin it, but people won't make much sense until they know the other stories. But so this trip to Italy in 1995, we're up in this little village. It's maybe about 200 people at the time. Now I think it's less than 100. Um, and as we're walking around, and this is where my grandfather and great grandfather came, and we see popcorn drying on burlap sheets on the side of the road. And I asked Paolo, who was our interpreter at the time, what's that about? And he says, oh, we grow popcorn here. And I turned to my dad, I said, this is why you invented Nutrinuts. You got popcorn in your blood.
Huh.
And I brought a sample of his snack. This snack wasn't out in stores yet, but I was making it. And I brought some to Italy, not knowing I was going to see popcorn.
Yeah.
And so I opened it up, and what it is, it's half pop. So it's these little golden nuggets. Doesn't look like popcorn, and they're crunchy, and they were fabulous. It's such a shame that they're no longer around. But so I tell Paolo, I say, so this is popcorn. This is something that my father invented, and it's made out of popcorn. And he looks at it, and it's not popcorn to Paolo. He sees a little golden nugget, and he's like, that's not a good popcorn. I said, no, Paulo, it's supposed to be that way. It's crunchy. And he goes, not the good the popcorn. And I said, you have to try it. You have to taste it. And he tasted it, and because he had popcorn in his head, he's going, it's not a good popcorn. So I said, we export this to Italy. That's going to be the name. Not a good popcorn.
Oh my God.
And so those three stories, me and my dad, our trip to Italy, and the snack food all came together on this mountaintop village. And so that's where I said I could weave all these three stories together. It's not going to be easy because they're literally three separate stories. So I'm writing each one separately, and then I'll figure out how to weave them together. But the end of the book will be that scene.
Well, I'm looking forward to whatever you do next. I love what you did, as I've said a number of times. So listen, I want to thank you for being here. Hang tight. When I end the show, I just want to talk to you when we get done. But thank you so much for being here, and I hope the angels keep helping you throughout your life.
Yeah, I hope so.
They're definitely with you.
Yeah.
Well,
So
thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
I appreciate you, and we'll talk again. So thank you so much, Mark Stephen Porro. Until we talk again, have a great
Okay.
day.
Take care, Jim.
Okay.